On today's Locked On Bucks, Camille and I are here to preview the must-win. I said it's overused, but it applies here. Must-win Game 6 in Indy for the Bucks. Who will they have available? We'll take a look at the injury reports. Same for the Pacers as well. And more importantly, what adjustments need to be made? What adjustments the Bucks made that they need to continue to carry over into Game 6? We'll dive into all of that coming up on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Camille Davis. You can find me on the Bucks Radio Network. You can find Camille everywhere this time of year, the Technical Foul Podcast, the Pack-A-Day Podcast, balancing the Packers and Bucks outlook here. We both thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen each and every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can view us on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's Locked On Bucks, sponsored by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. It's the fast-paced game that lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes, like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Camille, it's game on for the Bucks as well, as we've arrived at a Game 6. I think you and I talked about this, and you and Frank covered this on some of the post games from the weekend as well. Like, even when they fell down 3-1, I remember trying to convey this message on our post-game radio as well, is, look, I get it's not an enviable spot to be in. The series is not done. This is not the Miami Heat from last year. And I'm going to keep saying that and keep saying, look, I don't mean it as a sign of disrespect to the Indiana Pacers, but it's just not. You know, there is no Jimmy Butler that's going supernova. I know we've seen some big performances along the way from a number of players on the Indiana Pacers, but Rick Carlisle, he's a very good coach. I don't think Rick Carlisle has won a first-round series in over 10 years now. It's going on a long time. And it's just not the same that you were up against last year. On the court, everything that was going on off the court. I said after Game 3, it was a very frustrating loss, obviously. It may ultimately prove to be the death knell. If they lose this series, Game 3, I think, is what you would point to, because you had a chance. You know, that was there for the taking. Asking a depleted team to take 2 games is much different than 3. But I think we're aligned here. I just wanted to see this team fight. I know people said, I accepted the fate. Maybe, but I wanted to see them go out, if they're going to go out, like they did in 2022 against the Boston Celtics. And, I mean, if Game 5 is any indication, and Game 4, for that matter, to do that without Giannis, Dame, and Bobby Portis, that's what we're seeing from this group.
And just like you said, that's what you want to see. Like, after Game 4, doing post game, like, there are some people like, wow, you are really optimistic. And it's like, I'm not even really trying to be optimistic necessarily. Yeah. It's just, I'm looking at who this team had on the court. Like in Game 4, like you mentioned,
we wouldn't say it if we didn't believe it. Right. It's not just peddling the, hey, let's hang in there. Like this, and I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but this is not. This Pacers team is incredibly flawed. And I think the fact that the Bucks have made this competitive without Giannis, and now the last 2 games without Damian Lillard and without Bobby Portis in one of those, speaks to that.
It does. And it's like, I don't understand how you can look at that and be like, wow, like this team is really battling after they lost in Game 4. And Doc is like, this is the team that really believed that they were going to win. Like, a lot of teams, you get into a disadvantaged situation and it's like, well, I can see vacation in the distance, and like it is what it is at this point. But this Bucks team isn't looking for vacation. They believe that they have enough talent, regardless of who else is around them, that they should be able to hang with this Pacers team and beat this Pacers team. So the effort we saw in Game 4, I was applauding. Game 5 was beautiful to see that the Bucks became like the first team was in NBA history to win without their top 2 leading scorers scores from the regular season. Like, that's uncommon, and it's for a reason, especially with how this particular Bucks team is constructed, where it is so top heavy. This is a team that's led by Dame and Giannis and Chris, and it's like it all seemed to depend, especially in the regular season, on those three guys being healthy and running everything through them. So to see what they did in game 5, where you're seeing big contributions from Pat Bev in the second quarter, where you're seeing Bobby Portis take accountability for what happened in game 4 and how he let his team down and owning up to that, coming back and having a big game 5. Chris Middleton out here with 2 bad ankles, just giving everything that he has. Like, that's what you want to see. And I mentioned it on Tech File last week, where I was just like, Chris Middleton, whenever he is playing well, you know that I'm at my house going crazy. I love watching Chris Middleton play. And he showed us even back when he was younger in that Toronto series, like, he is not going to leave the court until like the final whistle has blown and the game is over. Like, he is going to give everything that he has. And that's what you want to see. You want to see that your team is not going to quit on themselves. And this is a Bucks team that faced a lot of adversity over the season. And you're seeing it on a game-to-game basis as well. How can they get over adversity that they're facing? They don't ever seem to get too down, even in that game 3 game where it's like, really wish we could have won that one. But for them to be in that big of a hole, that slow start, figure out a way to get back into it, force overtime, like, this team has no quit in them.
No, and we bring up the comment from Rob of I want a Chris Middleton appreciation post podcast here, win or lose.
I'm with you, Rob.
We will definitely do that. I mean, I joked, and I'm not even joking. If the Bucks force a game 7 here, game 7 halftime, that's where we get the Chris Middleton jersey retired, because it would take something like that and from Chris Middleton to keep this series going here. I saw some of the reaction we got. Is I got a text message from someone who will remain unnamed, right as Frank and I were wrapping up the podcast, saying they thought Giannis was going to play. We'll update the injury report too. I don't know that we have any better sense of that. But somebody that will also be unnamed, a national writer that covers the NBA that I converse with regularly. I remember talking to him just before the series started, asking his thoughts. And he picked the Pacers and thought even if Giannis played, the Pacers were going to win this series in 6 games at the most. And his points to me, I'm going to pull it up and read it now. Best case for this team is getting wiped out by Boston. Damian Lillard has flat out sucked, and they can't stop anyone. Giannis's injury is brutal because it's been nothing but excuses from that group all season. So this is the perfect cover story for the team to just quit, which is what I expect to happen. Again, that's not what we've seen. And that is, I think, the most encouraging part. I've seen a few comments trickle in kind of alluding to this, in that, we'd mentioned this too, and I hesitate to even bring it up because it can be, oh, you're couching here, or you're just trying to cope. But the reality is, next year was always going to be the optimized pairing of Giannis and Dame. With the fact that Damian Lillard arrived a week before training camp began, you went through 2 head coaches this season. You were continuing to adjust and learn. In all likelihood, it wasn't going to be until next year that this group really clicked. That didn't mean you couldn't be good, and I think they would be the first to admit the entire team this year was a disappointment in the regular season. But next year is what you would point to and say, look, that's where it's really going to take off, especially at an off-season together, an off-season in training camp with Doc Rivers. More importantly, how do you continue to develop guys like Andre Jackson Jr., AJ Green? And I even have my eye out there for Chris Livingston too, to see what he can give you. But all that being said, it's true. The reality is next year may be it, because of the makeup of this roster and the fact that Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez are both approaching walk years next year. That was always the danger of, look, next year is probably going to be the best version of this duo's pairing, but you don't know what else you're going to have around them the year after that. And then if that becomes the case, what they're going to look like and what this entire team is going to look like. So there's obviously a lot of truth to that, but it's also very dangerous to point to that and say, hey, next year we'll get them. And I think that's part of the fight that you're seeing from this team.
Yeah, because nothing's ever promised. You can think like, okay, hey, next year is going to be the year when this happens out, it's going to work out for us. But like, you got to stay in the here and now as well for this Bucks team. And that's what you're seeing from 'em. Like, they're not thinking about next year, like we mentioned earlier. Like, they are trying to win this series. And I know there's people like, well, y'all are injured. Like, if you do beat the Pacers in this series, then what, like the Knicks, like y'all, or maybe the 76ers at this point, but whoever that is standing on the other side waiting for you, like, do you have enough to get past them? And my mentality has been the same. I mentioned it on the game 4 post game where it's like a game at a time. I'm not thinking ahead. I'm not trying to say like, hey, if they win, and what's the injury situation look like? It's listen, today, May 2nd, game 6, like the Bucks need to win game 6, and then we talk about what happens thereafter. Like, that is the focus for this team. And we've heard that from the Bucks themselves, like a game at a time. They mentioned it before game 5, like how we're looking at it. We got a game at home. If we can win 2 at home and 1 in Indy, like then we're in business. But we just got to focus on what's in front of us right now. And this is a Bucks team where we've been hearing like, hey, maybe Dame's coming back, maybe Giannis is coming back. We've been hearing all of these other things throughout this series. And I just checked the injury report again from the bottom of the hour, still showing Dame and Giannis as doubtful for tonight's game, which does not mean that it's completely outside the realm of possibility that they do play or they don't play. But right now it's still listed as doubtful. So it could be another situation tonight in Indy where the Bucks, shorthanded, are going to have to find a way to beat the Pacers in Indiana, which is the place they haven't been able to win a game so far in this playoff series, or the regular series at that as well.
Yeah, and look, doubtful already for the 11:30 Eastern time injury report. Does not really bode well. We've seen the Sixers they got the fine because it was the same thing with Joel Embiid. He was out, granted, but they had him listed as out, 2 hours prior to the game. Then he upgraded and played. So you are subject to fines for that. Now, does that mean they won't come back and we could miraculously see this, 3 hours from now, update to questionable?
We'll love that.
If it is upgraded to questionable for either of the two, that to me is a massive indication. At the very worst, it is going to be you'll go through your pregame routines. We'll see how you feel after that. Maybe around a minutes restriction, but you are playing. If they are upgraded to questionable, that would be the sense that I get. So we'll continue to monitor that injury report, but your best friend maybe Jim Ozarski, Eric Name, others that are in Indianapolis, and just seeing the updates of who's going through pregame workouts. Can't shut down the bowl like the Bucks did before game 5, since you're the road team. Only the home team has the courtesy of doing that. So we'll know if Giannis is working out, and Dame for that matter, before this game today. A few other things, people saying call out whoever that national figure was. I'm not going to do that because I genuinely really like this person and trust his basketball takes. I already gave away too much saying his. But it is somebody that has historically been very pro Giannis and pro Bucks as well. So that's what really caught me off guard in that conversation that we were having. A couple other comments I do want to get to on the other side of the break as we take a look at the mindset and the approach for this Bucks going into a must-win situation in Game 6 in Indy. Camille and I will dig into that after this on Locked On Bucks. Time now to talk to you about Game Time. This episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Game Time. They are an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, and that makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off, and you can score killer last-minute deals. You can see your all-in prices. You don't get to your checkout screen and all of a sudden see there's $80 in fees added onto the price. You know up front what you're going to pay. Most importantly, you see the view from your seat. All of that with their lowest price guarantee makes Game Time the best app to use for getting your tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets by downloading Game Time. Again, those last-minute deals will save you up to 60% off when you're buying at the very last minute for the NBA playoffs, for sports, for concerts, for comedy, theater, WWE or AEW. If you're into the sweet science, all of that can be found on Game Time. So again, take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase on Game Time. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN all day as you get set for game number 6 here, you want to see some of those insights, maybe not so much like what I just read there, but you constantly find yourself having to turn down the volume because of all the shouting that you're hearing. If that is the case, then you need to make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Camille, there was one other comment that I wanted to point out, and that comes to us from Nintendo Prime. Players are not taking this for granted. That much is clear. When Middleton is getting injured in the game and then getting retaped and coming right back out, that is leading by example. I agree. I think that is very clear that this group knows it's an older group. And I think the other part of this, the reality is, this is 3 straight years now that, I mean, it's not so much an excuse. It is valid, but at some point it's the old adage of what's the definition of insanity, right? That this is 3 straight years that we're talking about injuries really playing a role in the Bucks exit or potential early exit from the playoffs. And I think that's a big piece of what he's referring to as well when we talk about he or she, players not taking this for granted, because I think this group knows, look, we saw this last year when Giannis went down in game 1. We saw this 2 years ago when we had to carry that charge without Chris Middleton, that you just never know what's going to happen. And again, it's not us projecting or wishing injuries, but I think that's part of the approach too, is look, this happened to us. The same thing could happen to our opponents. So you especially can't quit, because you never know what happens in these situations.
You can't quit. And I mean, that's something that we've talked about before. And I've asked this question even on the pod before, like, what's the difference between a reason and an excuse? Like, what's the difference between the two when you're thinking about it? Because some people point like, well, that's an excuse that you're using if you're saying that the Bucks were hurt. And it's like, I'm just pointing out the fact of it. And I mean, the other fact of it is, as well, during that championship run, the injury luck was on the Bucks side during that run up until the Eastern Conference Finals, where Giannis hurt his knee, and we didn't know what the future was going to hold with that team. And even yet and still during that series, we're just like, figure out a way to get to the finals. Who knows what can happen from there? So you got to keep playing. You got to keep playing. You don't know what's going to happen. And if you have a locker room with guys who all have belief in themselves, and that's one thing about having a veteran team as well. It's a lot of guys that have been through a lot of different situations, a lot of different playoff scenarios, and they just kind of figure out, like, we just have to, again, take it a game at a time and figure everything else out after that. So going into game 6, you understand what's at stake here. We win in Indiana, we get to go back home and play in Milwaukee again for the series. And you have to feel good about that opportunity. But again, you can't look ahead and say, like, hey, we just got to, hey, if Dame was here, if Giannis was here, we'd been already done with this series. Like, that's not how it folded. That's not how it unfolded. So you have to take it as it came. So this Bucks team, like, they're going to need, again, Chris is going to be the guy who you're looking to lead if there is no Dame and there's no Giannis. But honestly, even if those two or one of the two does play, given the fact that they're coming back off of serious injuries, we don't know if this is going to be a minutes restriction, as you mentioned. So I would still garner, like, Chris Middleton is still going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting regardless if one of the two do come back in this game. And then you're going to need, again, Bobby Portis. We're going to need Bobby Portis to come up big. You're going to need another role player, at least one, to have a big game. Like, we saw Pat Bev have a great game in game 5. We saw him have a great game in game 1, I believe it was, as well, where it wasn't necessarily points, but everything else that he can do on the court. And at this point in the series, you're starting to get to the point where you're like, okay, this is game 6. We saw this team 5 times in the regular season. This is going to be our 11th time seeing this team this year. there are only so many different things at this point you can look to tweak. Like we've seen Doc throw out the wrinkles with the switching everything in game 5. You want to see how that might look in game 6, how Rick Carlisle has prepared the team to face that in game 6. So like there's still a little bit of the chess pieces, but at this point, a lot of the things that you're seeing on the court, like you know who you are going to be playing against because there is so much familiarity between these two teams at this point.
I think too, look, if this season ends in the first round, we have the suggestion of the Chris Middleton appreciation show. We will definitely do that. I think we need the Doc Rivers one too, for the simple fact that this team is within a game of forcing a game 7 here. And especially what Doc Rivers did in game 5. I mean, look, we talked about it at the time of the hiring too. You understand all the memes and everything that's associated with Doc Rivers, some of it fair, some of it unfair. But I don't think it's up for dispute. Doc Rivers has coached a better series than Rick Carlisle so far. And, I don't know that most even Bucks fans would have projected that coming into this series. Yeah. Game 5 was his absolute masterclass too. When you look at some of the things that he did, obviously having Bobby Portis helped you out. But you mentioned Bobby Portis in his comments in addressing the team as well. I think it was pretty clear Bobby Portis was not going to have a bad game that day, that he was extra motivated. But some of the adjustments that Doc Rivers made in that game, and then having the sense too at halftime to say, okay, let's adjust again, because I know Rick Carlisle is going to make some adjustments. And it was after halftime, that's when we saw Doc Rivers move to, okay, Chris is going to take Miles Turner and Brooke Lopez is going to be on Nesmith out there on the perimeter. So it was an incredible job by Doc Rivers. The challenge is you need another incredible job by Doc Rivers tonight. And you need another incredible job by Chris Middleton, by Bobby Portis, by Brooke Lopez, and by someone else. Because, Camille, we talked about this all series long, and even coming into it, you need somebody else to hit shots. We mentioned Malik Beasley and whether or not he may be an X factor. We mentioned Andre Jackson Jr. Didn't look as though he would be early in the series, and then things changed with the injury to Damian Lillard. But even game 5, I suppose it's the, does it give you concern or not that we didn't really see the young guys in game 5? I think Ajax and AJ Green played a combined 10 or 11 minutes. That was the vet game. You got a good performance from Danilo Gallinari. That is my only concern going into game 6 is, are we going to ride the vets too heavy? To be clear, if that's what is done, we may take issue with it. And you may say, hey, you got to play Andre. You got to get some shooting from AJ Green. I can't dispute parts of that. But again, you understand why a coach would do that, and not just Doc Rivers. Rick Carlisle would do the same thing in that spot. Why you would ride your veteran guys. My only concern is, did you squeeze every last drop out of that sponge for some of those guys in game 5?
Yeah, and that's the thing about the playoffs. Like I see it coming through on the comments here. Apparently, Dame is now listed as questionable in this game here. I saw that Underdog NBA tweeted that out as well. And you know the gambling spots are always going to be locked in on player availability. But that's the thing with the playoff series, right? You have to figure out each game in of itself, because it's like every game is going to be a little bit different. Can you press the right buttons at the right time to find the right combinations that is going to get you to that victory? Because I mean, you think about game 4 where you're like, okay, this is a game where it's going into overtime. You saw the young guys coming in and they gave a lot of energy. We saw it. I can't remember, was it game 2 or 3 where Malik Beasley got an early pull and the young guys came in, and that was just like the end of Malik Beasley until it was garbage time in that particular.
It was
game.
2 and 3. Yeah, it was 2 and 3 for Malik that, we didn't see much in terms of his minutes really over the weekend, but starting in game 2. And not to cut you off, Camille, and I see some of the comments have picked up on it as well. Adrian Wojnarowski within the last minute tweeting, Giannis and Dame are both working to try to make a return versus the Pacers for game 6 tonight. Unclear if either will be able to, but they are working to try to play tonight. Now, it's a lot of word salad that doesn't mean anything. I mean, the assumption all along was they were working to play. I would have been hoping for a little bit more details or concrete of what they were actually able to do. But you're at least starting to see the ball move towards that now.
And that's what this whole series was about. Like my initial prediction for this series was Bucks in 7, having all of the questions around health of Giannis initially, and now you add Dame into that mix as well, where it's like I think the Bucks have enough talent. At that time, it was with Dame on the court to figure out a way to hold it down, at least until maybe Giannis can come back if he can. And now you're seeing like they're working, like you mentioned. They've been working to try to get back. That's nothing new. We knew that Giannis was going to be pushing. We knew Dame was going to be pushing. So, I mean, you want to get like I can't let myself be like they're playing until I actually see the report come out saying like they are available for tonight's game.
Yeah.
But you love to hear how close that they might be. And again, even if they don't play, if the Bucks can find a way, if they are shorthanded, to continue to extend this series to give those guys more time to try to get back, that's what you're playing for right now.
I do want to get to that in our final segment of, I mean, not even the importance tonight. Obviously, it's important to win to keep your season alive, but what that means for both of these teams in a game 7, even if you don't have Giannis and Dame or Giannis or Dame. And I do want to, just so it doesn't start to spread like wildfire, clean something up here, as I'm seeing people, Woj reporting both Giannis and Dame are working out. Unless he went on TV and clarified, he did not say working out. He said working to play. So take from that what you will. Again, it was a whole lot of nothing really in that report that, hey, they're trying to play. Of course, I think we've gotten that sense for a couple of days now. But what it means if the Bucks win and force a game 7, and what that game 7 would look like Saturday in Milwaukee. Camille and I will get into that discussion coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, it is game off here, so we got to pause and talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play, whistle, foul. You already talked about that, but there's a lot of good stuff going on in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you can unlock. There's also much more to get. Unique stickers. You can trade those with friends to complete albums for big prizes. There's cool new playing pieces to travel boards with. There's emojis included. You can use to taunt your friends when you're taking their buildings or taking all of their winnings. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day because the tournaments and challenges are constantly changing. There's a ton to include their own unique mini games like digging for treasures, or a robot pachinko machine. Who doesn't know what that is? And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right. So again, to clarify, Adrian Wojnarowski reporting Giannis and Damian Lillard are working to play in this game 7. Not working out. I would assume if they're going to play, there is some working out going on. But let's not start to put the cart ahead of the horse here. None of this is unexpected. Of course, they were going to try and play in this game number 6. And the one thing I mentioned before the series started, Camille, that I just hate it, and you hear it so much, not just from fans, from other analysts, from people this is their job to project these things. When you start to hear Giannis is out, but if the Bucks go down 2-1, then he'll come back, as if the injury will magically heal and he's able to play, depending on what the results in the series are. If Giannis can play, Giannis is going to play. It was never as simple as let's see what the series looks like. And it's the same story with Damian Lillard. All of that being said, I'm about to be guilty of what I just criticized. If the Bucks win tonight, let's say Giannis and Dame do not play. If they win and force a game 7, can you really envision a scenario where Giannis does not play in game 7 unless something massively happens behind the scenes where we're not told? It's gone from maybe, even if it's doubtful to questionable, there's a chance to, hey, there's no chance.
So here's the thing with that. I feel like you were saying where it's like, if Giannis can play, he would have been playing. And if it's a game 7 situation where it's like, this is it, if he still can't go or there are concerns about that injury, I could see a world where the Bucks would have to try to win that game 7 without him. And that's what I've been saying this whole time. To your point, I'm glad that you said that, where people have been thinking like this is a thing where like he could play, but like we're just holding him off because we want to make sure that he like it's not a situation like that where they're looking at how the series is playing out. Like, okay, we're just trying to get up in the series and then we can bring him back. Like, if this if they were looking at a 3-1 deficit, if this team was looking at a 3-0 deficit and Giannis couldn't go, like then he wouldn't go. Like, of course he's going to be in the background trying to push the play, but at this point, like if the Bucks had to win game 6 without Dame or Giannis, and then we get to game 7 and it's like he's still in that same spot, like I could see it where the Bucks might have to still win the series without him at that point. I don't think it's a thing at this point where it's like, we're going to throw him out here if it's elimination game. Like, he has to be right, because this is not only an injury that can affect him in this series, it could affect the rest of his career. So you have to be careful with that.
It could affect next year, obviously. Yeah. And I mean, with that, it could affect the next decade of the Bucks, because if something goes south there, as we just mentioned earlier in the show, the fact that it's a walk year for 2 of your big pieces. And I would assume regardless of what happens this series, we see some more tinkering. The other thing that we'll get into once the season officially ends is Frank's expertise. But when Frank and I were talking a couple of days ago, I think the Bucks are actually going to be able to avoid the second apron here. So that would be massive for the Bucks. This season, especially this offseason, when anything they could potentially do. But there's going to be plenty of time to get into all of that once the season does officially come to an end, which hopefully is not tonight or tomorrow for this Bucks team. We mentioned what it would mean in a game 7. We've said, the approach by this team, and we heard from Doc Rivers and a number of players too, is just, you got to win game 5. Okay, you did. You got to win game 6. And that's how you move on down the line. To me, the start tonight is important, because I hesitate to say it's even a fast start. Literally, in this case, you don't want it to be a fast game and playing to the Pacers' speed. But to me, the big thing is just don't start poorly, because you can't have a redux of what we saw in game 3, where you blink and it's basically a 20-point game. Oh, by the way, you don't know if Damian Lillard is going to return in that one either. That's what you can't have in this scenario. So you absolutely have to avoid that disastrous start. And I mean, again, this is kind of conjecture and more of the, that's what people always say when they speak in generalities. But the longer this game is close, to me, the more interesting it's going to be, because it's a Pacers team that is not closed out teams before. It's a Pacers team that hasn't won a first-round series in over a decade. Pretty similar to the Bucks. Pascal Siakam's the guy that has the most experience in the postseason, and all of that came basically in the 19 and 20 playoffs, when a bulk of his games played came on those 2 deep runs that the Toronto Raptors had. So the longer this thing is close, the more you would think, as we kind of said the same about the series, the longer it goes without Giannis, the more it favors the Bucks, because they're the veteran team. The longer this game goes, that it is within question, it's one of those clutch games, the more you would have to think it favors the Bucks, because of their experience, but also because of that mentality and what's going to set in for the Pacers of knowing, holy crap, we were up 3-1. We're facing going back to Milwaukee now in a closeout game 7. And even if Giannis doesn't play tonight and Dame doesn't play tonight, who knows if they're going to be back for game 7 on Saturday. So that to me is the big thing. Don't dig yourself an early hole. We say you got to control the pace here. Easier said than done, though I do think the Bucks have largely done a good job of doing that, really, since game 2 and the first quarter of game 3 as well. But just keep this thing close.
Yeah, that's all you can do. And if you're the Bucks and you do get out to a fast start, then what you're going to be trying to do is create separation throughout most of the game. And this has been a series where the games have been pretty close. Like, I mean, you had outside of the first game where it's like Milwaukee got off to a really hot start. They had the really big second quarter, but then that third quarter came and the Pacers were able to make it interesting at that point before the Bucks put it away. And then in game 2, it's like, okay, here comes Indy. They came out pretty big. Like they did not look like the same team they did in game one. They came out pretty strong. They won every quarter by a couple of points, and that led to them, getting a big victory. In game three, the Bucks got off to a really slow start in that first quarter, and getting off to a slow start and digging yourselves into a big hole, that takes a lot of energy, and your margin of error is so slim at that point when you are trying to overcome a deficit. So you want to try to see the Bucks stay connected throughout the game, if not have the lead and keep the Pacers like at a distance behind them. And one thing I'll be looking to see in this game in particular is the 3-point shooting, because the Pacers got a lot, like they've been shooting more threes in this series than they normally do in the regular season that we saw from this team. A lot of that's because they've had a lot of good looks. So you've seen it over in game 5 where the Bucks got a little bit better at closing out and making sure that they weren't getting as many open looks. And that's something that I know I'm going to be taking a look at in this game, because you look at the 2 games they had in Indiana with the Pacers. In game 3, the Pacers got up almost 50 3-pointers. Like they shot 49 3-pointers in that game. And then come game 4, they're shooting 43 of them. Like the Pacers average about 35 threes per game in the regular season. So seeing them shoot, almost 50 threes in the game, where a lot of them are pretty good looks, like the Bucks are going to have to make sure they can continue to keep some pressure on them from that 3-point line as well, because that's the great equalizer in the NBA right now. And that's a good big reason as to why a lot of big leads aren't safe anymore, because if you get a couple possessions where the other team doesn't score and you're able to knock down a couple of quick threes, like it changes the dynamics really quickly for this team. So in addition to how we know the Pacers like to play fast and the transition, like if we can keep running them off the 3-point line a bit, that's going to do wonders for this Bucks team trying to figure out a way to get a game 6 victory to force game 7 back in Milwaukee.
The other interesting part of this is, and I'll preface with, I get it, Tyrese Halliburton is clearly not 100%.
Right.
I think that was even more clear in game 5. He's hitting threes now, which he wasn't doing early in the series, but he's not moving the same. And even going back to game 1, we questioned, what was this pace that we saw from the Pacers? Was it just kind of dipping your toe in the playoff water and getting used to that? Part of it probably, but Tyrese is still clearly not there. And it seems like it's going to be an off-season thing for Tyrese Halliburton. If I told you, Camille, coming into this series, knowing that that Tyrese Halliburton was going to be tied for the 6th leading scorer in this series, you'd think there's a pretty good chance the Bucks are wrapping this up early, right? That's been the interesting part is, oh, by the way, you never had Giannis. So that changed things. Damian Lillard has now missed, basically could miss the rest of the series. We'll just leave it at that. Brook Lopez has been pretty good. Chris Middleton is leading the series in scoring. All of that passes the eye test. And the Pacers have kind of traded off big games from Siakam and Turner. 3-point shooting is really the big thing to point to for the Pacers, is they've had those moments where they've been the team that shot better. It's been 2 extremes for the Pacers in 3-point shooting. Either they've been really bad or they can't miss in this series. And unfortunately for the Bucks, one of those games were maybe not so much really bad, but they gave you opportunities you did not win. And that's what could ultimately haunt them. Now, shooting, I agree with you. 3-point shooting is going to be huge in this game. I do wonder if you change the approach that we saw defensively. As we said, Doc Rivers clearly tried to stay a step ahead of Rick Carlisle's. I'm just reading some of these updates in the comments now. Doc Rivers was clearly trying to stay a step ahead of him and saying, okay, now we're going to change even more so what we're doing. So you wonder, are you going to do the same, or do you just say, look, we found something that works? We know the Pacers are still kind of slowed down by our zone. And as Doc said, when we switch everything, even with Brook on the floor, and I wonder if you're going to see even fewer Brook Lopez minutes, which we seemingly saw pieces of that in game 5, where you'd look up and think, man, Brook isn't on the floor. I wonder if you're going to continue to see that, because they found, even if the Pacers figure this out in the half court, we figured out how to slow them down somewhat in transition. As Doc said after the game, when you're switching everything, it's easier to get back in transition because you're not looking for your guy. You're just looking for a guy that you're closest to and saying, okay, find him, get to him. And it slowed the Pacers down. So I think you got to stay with it. Even if you are assuming Rick Carlisle is going to say, okay, here's what they're doing. Here's how we're going to counter it. You just have to stay with that until they prove to you that you can't do that. So that could help them in terms of their 3-point shooting. I don't think the numbers we saw from the Pacers to close in the final 3 quarters was all because of the Bucks switching everything on the perimeter. I'm sure it was a part of it, but you're going to need someone else to hit shots tonight. You're going to need, obviously, Bobby and Chris, and you would assume Brooke to have big games, but you're going to need someone to hit threes. You've gotten that from Malik Beasley 2 games in a row. Can he do that again? Is it AJ Green? Is it someone else? But one of those guys, you get the sense, or Pat Connaughton, you just get the sinking feeling of, I feel like we need one guy that hits 5 threes in this game that's going to keep us afloat.
It's got to be somebody. It's got to be somebody. And that's the thing about the playoffs, where it's like every game is different. That's why we always say role players can swing a playoff series, because you get a game where a role guy is just extremely hot and it flips the course of action for that team. I mean, I think back to the championship year in the Bryn Forbes game, where it's like, that was it. We just needed that one game, Bryn Forbes. Like, we needed that particular output from you in that game. So who's it going to be tonight? Who knows? But the important thing is for guys, when they're out there and thinking about that, understanding what pressure that they're playing with, but still remembering to play basketball the right way. You can't force it. You can't try to go be hero ball. We don't want to see anybody out there like Carlton from Fresh Prince trying to take the last shot. Like, play the game the right way. Let that dictate where the shots are coming from. Make sure you're passing them good shots for great shots, and let the game come to you in that way. But understand that you can't be scared in that moment either, but you have to continue to play ball the right way. So who's it going to be in game 6 for the Bucks? Who knows? AJ Green feels like somebody who's due, because the 3-point shooting has not been there for him throughout this series and his limited minutes. Like, if he can come in a couple of minutes of time and knock down some big threes, that's going to be big for the Bucks. If Beasley can have a 3rd straight game of bringing that offense, that's going to be big for this team as well. If we can get a big Bobby game on the road, which we've talked about the home and the road splits for Bobby Portis. Like, if he can have an exceptional game, because we're going to even have a good game regardless, because he is one of the big dogs on this team right now with the injuries. But like, if you can have a special game, that changes the dynamic as well for the team. So game 6 in Indiana, and you mentioned it on the post game with Frank, interesting start time being 5:30 Central Time. Like, there's going to have to be somebody. So we'll see who steps up today.
So as we've seen a few commenters chiming in here, the update, latest update, I should say, on Twitter from the Pacers sideline guy, Jeremiah Johnson, is that Damian Lillard has been upgraded to questionable. Giannis is still listed as doubtful. I am working to confirm this, because you don't submit your injury reports until the bottom of the hour. You submit them, but they're not going to be revealed until 15 minutes from now as we're recording this. So I'm very curious where this is coming from. He also had the report that Tyrese Halliburton was changed on the injury report before game 4, I believe it was, did Jeremiah Johnson. So we'll see. My assumption all along was if one of the 2 guys returned, it was going to be more likely it was Giannis than Damian Lillard, based off some of the things that I had heard. So, look, I know Reggie White had that massive healing power that he got to return, and Giannis for that matter too. Maybe we've seen the same with Damian Lillard. And look, here's the important part of it is, I've seen a few people point out decoy, right? Can you use them as decoys? Maybe, you could use Damian Lillard as a decoy, as the Bucks admitted they did in overtime of game 3. You can't use Giannis as a decoy. There's no way with his game. It's not as though you're going to throw him out there because, hey, maybe he can still knock down a corner 3, or maybe he'll hit a mid-range shot. Giannis's game is explosion, bursting to the hole, finishing in the paint and around the rim. There's no decoy to that, especially when you're dealing with a soft tissue injury. So, look, if you get one of those guys, and that's the other part, Camille, we just said you need somebody to hit a lot of threes. Enter Damian Lillard, if that's the case, especially today on the whatever year anniversary it is. I think 11 or 12 year anniversary of Damian Lillard putting away the Houston Rockets in the playoffs on that buzzer beater. So that would be a guy that you would think could knock down threes in bunches for you. if he is available to play in this series tonight. And especially when you look at what the Bucks have been able to do in this series. Damian Lillard and his shooting in this series, 16 of 36 on threes in his 3 games played in this first round series against the Pacers. The only guy that's made more threes is Miles Turner than Damian Lillard has, and he's missed 2 games already, potentially 3. So we've seen the impact from Dame and what he can bring, but the other frustrating part is not just injuries. The numbers have risen significantly for the Pacers after game 4 especially, but for a while in this series, the Bucks were shooting 38% on their threes and the Pacers were down to 30%. I mean, you talk about just the cruel twist of things, that it's once again injuries, because you finally get shooting as a whole for the Bucks from 3, and your opponent is not shooting 50% or close to that, and yet you're in a 3-1 hole. So yeah, to me, the big things that we touched on, Camille, are the way you start the game. Just don't dig yourself a 20-point hole. Don't dig yourself a double-digit deficit early. It's not to say you can't come back from a 10-point margin. You don't want that in the first 2 or 3 minutes of the game. And keep this thing close as late as you can, because that's going to start to change things in terms of pressure on the opponent. But the big thing, you mentioned it in much more detail, is 3-point shooting. You've got to at least remain competitive there. It can't be another game where you're outscored by 30 points on that line. Yep. Even if the Pacers make more, it's got to be manageable. The Pacers make 13 threes, you made 10, something along those lines. But you need somebody to heat up besides what you expect to get from Chris and Bobby, I suppose, although as we've touched on throughout the year, it's been a different split for Bobby on the road versus home. But this is one of those games where it's, hey, Bobby, we need everything you've got in the tank tonight.
Would be beautiful to get a special Bobby Portis game tonight, especially with the reception that he's been getting while he's in Indiana with the Bobby sucks chants and everything like that. And the last time that we saw him, he was getting kicked out the game in the first quarter. So it would be some type of poetic justice to see Bobby have a really, really big game as well tonight. But one thing just to keep in mind, because I did see someone ask Eric Name this about if the team has practiced yet today, and like when are we going to get another update from the team directly. Eric Name mentioned the fact that the Bucks are not holding a formal shoot around today, so there will be no media availability until Doc Rivers speaks before the game at about 4 p.m. Central Time. So for Bucks fans who are looking to stay up to date as soon as they possibly can, and you're on the website formerly known as Twitter, Eric Name is definitely a good follow. And around that 4 p.m. time, Central Time, is when Doc is expected to be speaking to the media. So keep an eye on the injury report as it keeps coming out. The next one should drop at the bottom of this hour, so about 10 minutes from now, as we are talking live on this live edition of Locked On Bucks. Something to keep an eye on, because this is a big game for the Bucks. As we've mentioned, win or go home at this point, or you win and go home to play again. So that's what we're hoping to have for the Bucks tonight. But we're going to need for our big stars that we have on the court, regardless if that's Dame or Giannis, but Chris, Bobby, Brooke, to have good games. And good games are not just points on the board. Like, of course, you have to outscore your team, but the defense, the rebounding, which has been a big thing for this team as well, making sure you actually end possessions that the Pacers have by securing that defensive rebound and officially ending their possession. You don't want to get outworked on the board. You don't want to get outworked in transition, and you want to hope that you're not getting killed on that 3-point line as well. So if the Bucks can stay on the right side of a lot of those key statistics, like, it should be a good day for the Milwaukee Bucks.
All right, we are live, so it is currently 11:21 Central Time. 9 minutes from now, we will know if Damian Lillard is in fact upgraded to questionable. I said at the top of the show, Camille, if one or both of these guys are upgraded to questionable, I take that as they are going to play. You don't go from doubtful to questionable and then just, well, we tried, but we can't play. So I think as soon as we wrap up here, that's what I'm going to be doing. I already reached out to a few people that are in Indy to see what is the validity to this, and can you tell me what is currently going on? But I'm sure Bucks fans will be doing the same as soon as they log off of this viewing here, headed to the NBA injury report to get the latest. And that's my last PSA. I've said this all throughout the years as well when I lurk on the MKE Bucks subreddit too. Shouts to that group, by the way, for all the optimism that we've seen within them. But whenever I see anybody posting injury reports from ESPN or somewhere else, don't look at anything other than the league's injury report. None of the rest is accurate. Nothing that you see on any of the betting sites or ESPN or CBS. Just go to the NBA's injury reports and take a look there. Any final thoughts from you, Camille?
I see one comment that said, let's get a live reaction in 8 minutes. I don't know about that, Samuel. We've already gone over our time today, but make sure you're following us both on Twitter, or I should say X. At this point, we'll definitely be tweeting about what we're learning from other sources coming in as well. So make sure you stay locked into that, as well as on Locked On Bucks. We'll be having a post-game show as well after Game 6. But I'm just really excited, Justin, like to get to the game, to see the game. Like, we're lucky to do this where we get to talk about the Bucks, and on that fandom side of it, just being able to watch my team. Like, I hope it's not the last night that we see the Milwaukee Bucks taking court in this particular season.
And look, we've had a massive audience joining us for this one today because of the way that the Bucks have fought and come back to potentially even this series. Camille, if they win tonight, I would assume the post game that you and Frank do is going to be the most viewed we've had since some of the other storylines had played out this season. That first game of Damian Lillard's premiere in a Bucks uniform was among the highest viewed that we had as well. But the Game 7, the anticipation that would move towards Game 7 if we get there. The last thing I will say, and you and I have talked about this before too, there's no analytics to this. There's no like, hey, if you do this, this will happen, and so on. It's just the sheer notion of, if anyone was due to come back from a 3-1 deficit, it would be the man that so far has outcoached Rick Carlisle in this series, and that is Doc Rivers. So that is the last piece that I'm going to cling to. But we're now 5 minutes away from learning if Damian Lillard is being upgraded to questionable. I did just get one text from someone else that was, well, it was just the Bradley Beal text saying, I'll be damned. But I don't know if that means he is in fact questionable or playing or what that means. But yeah, so 4 or 5 minutes from now, we'll know, is he questionable? And if that is the case, I think there's a pretty good chance he is playing in this game. So a lot to keep an eye on here in the coming hours as we get set for another early tip, which means the post game will be even earlier than usual. Good news for Frank, I know, and you as well, Camille. But for Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you once again on the post game from Game 6 tonight. And I'm not in the predictions business, Camille, but I do get the vibes. We are going to be previewing a Game 7 to look forward to.
I kind of feel it too, but I'll wait and see. We'll wait and see.
We'll talk to you once again later tonight with the post game on Locked On Bucks.